So I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, the last week and a half or so, my Facebook memories have been filled with reminders that it was just about this time 3 years ago that everything changed. We were completely reordering our lives as the COVID-19 pandemic hit the United States. Schools, offices, and churches, we were shutting down our buildings and moving everything online. And overnight, the world changed. And I remember in the first few months of the pandemic how kind people were. How communities rallied around essential workers, healthcare workers, teachers, grocery store employees. It seemed that everyone was willing to do their part to flatten the curve. I miss that. You know, one of the words that was used to describe what was going on at the time was apocalyptic. And I would say that that's a pretty accurate description. Because after all, the definition of apocalypse means an unveiling, a revelation, being able to see things that you couldn't see before. The last 3 years have really shown us what this world is really like, as things have been exposed and uncovered and made plain and laid bare. Maybe we were blind before, but now we see. We see that we're fragile. We see that we are one, interconnected and interdependent. We see that our daily choices can have life or death consequences for us and for other people. We see that unselfish love is risky, it's inconvenient, and yet it's essential. Our gospel reading from John 9 this week is all about this kind of costly scene. What does it cost us to have our eyes opened? And in my studies this week, I came across a poem by Israeli poet Yehuda Amichai, and it's titled, "The Place Where We Are Right." This poem captures what I see as the crux of the message in our text for today. The poem goes like this: "From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, like a plow. And a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood." In John's Gospel, Jesus heals a ruined man on the Sabbath. A man, the text says, was blind since birth. And even though this is, even though this is a miracle story, the author doesn't spend much time with the healing itself, focusing instead on the response of the religious community. And it's in this response is where I think that Amichai's poem resonates, speaking powerfully to the challenges of our own time and place. From the place where we are right, the poet writes, flowers will never grow in the spring. In other words, one of the most barren and desolate places you can occupy as a Christian is a place of smugness, of rightness, of certainty. You know the attitude I'm talking about, right? It's the attitude that proclaims proudly, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. The attitude that wants their faith to dictate how you live your life. The attitude that doesn't allow for nuance and complexity. The attitude that leaves no room for the movement of the Holy Spirit. And in my experience, the more convinced you are that you have full insight, that you have full comprehensive, full knowledge, the less you will see and experience God. Even before Jesus heals the man who was born blind, the disciples assume that the blindness was his own fault. So they ask Jesus, who sinned and incurred God's displeasure, the man himself or his parents? But Jesus rejects the entire premise of their question. There's no relationship, Jesus says, between the man's condition and his sinfulness. God does not make people sick to punish them for any wrongdoing. God does not make people sick, period, I would add. But when we step away from our neighbor's suffering because we assume it's divinely ordained, it's not righteous. It's reprehensible. So in this story John tells, Jesus sees the blind man, really sees him. A man who no one else really sees. In the eyes of his community, he's nobody. He's contaminated. He's burdensome. He's expendable. It's kind of like what we heard in our good trouble moment. The disabled community often, especially a long time ago, were seen as dispensable, shut away. In the community's calculus of human worth, this man barely registers. He's not seen as a human being. He's seen for his ailment, seen as blindness. Which is why when the man's sight is restored by Jesus, his own community, the people he's lived with and worshiped with for years, they don't recognize him. They don't know how to see him without his disability. To do so would mean recognizing this common humanity, a bond, a kinship. They just can't do that. So when the man shows up at the temple, healed and whole, the community rallies around him, around each other to discredit him, to restore order, to maintain the status quo. Why? Why does the community feel such an urgent need to silence this man who's been healed? Is it fear? I think so. I think it's a fear so primal and so deep that it drives away all compassion, all empathy, all kindness, all sense of kinship. If the man's blindness isn't a punishment for sin, what does that mean about the way the world works? What does it mean for the rest of us? Does this mean that anyone can get sick? Or suffer from a disability? Or face years of undeserved pain and suffering for no discernible reason whatsoever? That's not fair. We can't have that. That would be a version of reality that good religious folks just couldn't control. It's a terrifying, destabilizing version. We don't like to surrender that kind of control. All week, as I read and studied and pondered this text, I couldn't shake the thought that there are so many similarities to this story and the treatment of our queer siblings in many parts of America these days, especially trans folks. In state legislatures all across the country, bills are being introduced and laws are being passed that would codify discrimination and hate against the LGBTQI plus community. From Florida's Don't Say Gay bill to bans on children books that depict diverse families to criminalizing gender affirmation treatment, which, by the way, many cis people and straight folks take advantage of just as much as trans folks. And also to bans on drag shows. These death-dealing bills and laws are filled with pure hate and spite for a community that a very small population of the very small percentage of the population don't even see as human. Funded by the elite and powerful of the religious right, they are behaving just like the religious leaders in the story today. So I wonder, what would it feel like if the story played out like this? As Jesus walked along, he came across someone struggling with their gender. The disciples say, "Who sinned that this person is like this?" And Jesus answered, "No one sinned. No one. This person's a beloved child of God in whom God's mighty works might be displayed." And turning to the person, Jesus laid his hands upon them and told them that they are loved and they are whole, just as they are. And they went home, and when they returned, she was dressed as the person she felt she was. And when she returned, her neighbors and those who used to see her were confused. "Is this the man we used to see? No, she looks like him, but it can't be." And she turned to them and said, "Yes, it is me." And the religious leaders didn't believe she was the same person and argued with her parents and then with her, and finally kicking her out of the temple. And when Jesus heard that they had expelled her, he went looking for her and found her. There's a cartoonist from Canada named David Hayward. He writes and shares his stuff under the handle @NakedPastor. And he does cartoons, a lot of cartoons. And he has this cartoon that popped up this week that I remember that really made me think of this story here. All right, so the image of the cartoon, you have a group of sheep on one side, and then Jesus, and another Jesus on the other side with a sheep on his shoulders. And the sheep is colored in the colors of the trans flag. So blue and pink and white. And the crowd of sheep are saying to Jesus, "Whoa, whoa, 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 hold it right there. He wasn't lost. We kicked him out." And Jesus says back, "I know, and I found her." Yeah. In both our text today and our reimagined story, the legalistic approach to faith by the community prevents them from seeing the person made whole by their encounter with Jesus. It also prevents them from seeing God's love and power at work in their midst. In his encounter with Jesus, the blind man was made to see. In her encounter with Jesus, the trans woman was made to see that she is loved fully in who she is. And both were made whole. And yet, no one in the stories rejoiced when this healing and wholeness was received. No one in the story rejoiced when the man was healed. No one, not even the man's parents, expressed joy or wonder or gratitude or awe. No one says, "Oh, I'm so happy for you." And instead, the community responds with contempt. Its need to preserve its own sense of righteousness was seemingly much more important than celebrating a fellow human being's restoration to life. The place where we are right, the poem I quoted at the beginning says, the place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. Hard and trampled, hard and cynical, hard and suspicious. I believe that vulnerability, softness, curiosity, and openness are essential to real seeing. The Gospels tell us that Jesus' true identity eludes just about everyone, including the disciples, until after the resurrection. Most people who encounter Jesus are too busy seeing what they want to see to notice what the man born blind discerns by the end of the story. The healed man sees Jesus as the Messiah and calls him Lord. I think that this is one of those rare and beautiful moments in the scriptures where Jesus is truly seen. The healed man sees Jesus as holy and purely as Jesus sees him. The recognition of each other is mutual because the spiritual ground he stands on is soft and subtle. He's able to see God as God is. Doubt and love dig up the world like a mole, like a plow, the poem says. They allow the whispers of God's Spirit to bring forth new life. I'm in awe, really in awe at the trust the healed man has in Jesus by the end of the story. It's a trust that's deep enough to enable him to bear honest witness to his experience, that this man, even when it's a risky venture, he goes and he proclaims it. And it gets him kicked out of the temple. And finding and claiming his new identity as a healed and whole child of God, he becomes a disciple of Jesus then, committing himself without looking back. And connecting with the story earlier in Lent, he is truly born again. As you move through this Lenten season, may you confess your blindness and receive sight. May you praise the one who kneels in the dirt and gets his hands dirty in order to bring you wholeness and healing. May you soften and prepare the ground you stand on so that when new life appears, in whatever way, whatever surprising way God chooses, you'll embrace it, you'll cherish it, you'll celebrate it, and you'll share the good news too.